I wanted to preface this with saying, and everyone can see my slides, right? I just want to say, I'm not approaching this as someone, obviously people are looking for jobs, and I'm not approaching this as someone who I have a job and I'm looking down on people who are trying to get their foot in the door. I've actually been in some very poignant personal situations, where I was trying to get a job, in a specific location for a specific period of time right before a period of grad school started. And, I've even been in a situation where, I was let go from a job on a Friday afternoon. And by Monday afternoon, I honestly needed to have a job before I went into a bank for a meeting to get a mortgage on my house. So it's undoubtedly some people are going to have easy steps into their first job or into their next job for many of you, but others will find it very effortful. And I just want to say that I am approaching this from the perspective of humility. You're going to hear some probably more, flippant comments or casual comments from me, but ultimately I do understand that this is a very stressful scenario for many people. And I want you to know that you're not alone or unique in that stressor. There's nothing wrong with you for feeling that stress. This is a very real thing that's worth taking seriously. My other disclaimer, and I'll tell you this, I still feel the stressors around those previous challenges. So they are quite poignant. Quick disclaimer, of course, that these opinions are entirely my own. They do not represent the views of anybody else. So don't go after my job or anyone. They don't represent Kim's views or Rick's views or Julia's views or anyone else, not saying these words. I'll probably have revised some of these views by the end of the call, especially if we have a good conversation. And I'll definitely have changed most of them by the end of next week. So my opinions on these things are always changing, but here's sort of my best guess about where they are right now. Now, to give you the best possible views, our most informed views that I have, my goal for this talk is to essentially to help moderate your expectations and sort of make sure that you're psychologically fortified for the task of going out and looking for a job. And my goal is not to give you good news or bad news or anything like that. It's mainly just to make you succeed in the way that I think you're most likely to. And I also am sort of having this ancillary goal of covering advice that's likely neglected elsewhere. So I think of it sort of like a principal component analysis where you're probably getting most of your advice varies along certain things. So if you've done the preliminary search, you can see the things like saying, get your CV brushed up, present yourself well, be prepared, things like that. And what my goal is essentially, I'm trying to work along a different principal component so that you're going to get something different from what you've seen from other people. And I did prep work on this. So for about the 4 months prior to this, this conversation starting in about December, I've actually been in direct conversation with a number of bachelor's degrees and MSc level students looking for both data science and stats jobs across various areas. And honestly, I've spent about probably between 30 minutes to a few hours with these dozens of people. I keep calling them students because that's what they are, but many of them, they are in fact job applicants. And after basically hearing their feedback, I got a control group because obviously it was a little bit hard for me to judge exactly what was going on. Some of these people I have actually spent several hours speaking to over several months as they go looking for their job. For one of them, I actually sat down on a Friday afternoon and knocked out for about 3.5 hours, having 30-minute on-the-dot conversations with a number of students. So I was trying to collect as much data on this as possible and give them the best advice that I could think of. But I also wanted to have my own control group, so I got 6 doctoral candidates, so people with PhDs from an elite university. And if you know my background, you can probably guess which university that is. But anyway, these are people who are, the reason I consider them a control group is because they are highly competent people. They're articulate and they have well-documented successes. So these are people who are well-respected in the upper tiers of data science and machine learning research. And basically what I asked them to do is go out and apply to a bunch of jobs and see what happens. Because, these are people who I know would actually be very successful. And pretty much you throw them into any data science job and they're going to succeed at it. And I wanted that as the baseline to see what happened and what the treatment people were. If a company was handed just a pristine candidate, would they what is the interaction like with them? So I could try to gauge things. And of course, possibly least importantly is my own experience on these things. I say it's least important because I have been on both sides of the applicant table. I have strongly advocated when I was on the other side of the hiring table for candidates who really impressed me. And I've also seen candidates really mess up. But I consider that possibly less important because obviously there's a huge amount of currency bias in people's experiences, and I don't want to overweight my own opinion on these things. And so putting these all together, we have a set of data points and hypotheses, and I'm just going to sort of go through them and hit on things that seem to be common aspects that people are tripping up on. So the first aspect is the application process. And again, just to make sure that this is as informative or useful as possible, a quick strategy is, if you have a question or and you just want me to go into something in a little bit more detail, just feel free to pop it in the comments. And we can either go through it in more detail at the time, or we can go through it at the end. And it doesn't need to be a super well articulated thing. Just say like, Glenn, can you talk more about the saddle point idea or what an actual concrete strategy is? And so first one is, surviving the application process. So I view that the application is concretely different. Actually getting someone to look at your CV and bring you in for an interview is a concretely different step than the process of having someone basically going through the actual interview process. Because I think that the moment you have your foot in the door, a lot of good people have a very good chance of getting the job. So if you're a competent person who's good at representing yourself, well, then you have a very good chance. So I think that those are two things. One is also much more, I guess, sanitized, impersonal. But it's basically just sending your applications in. And I wouldn't suggest that anyone try to essentially survive this process. But what I mean is, do not try to apply and not get rejected. I think people should just play the numbers game on this one. And by the numbers game, what I mean is that there's a saddle point between the effort that you put into each application and the total number of applications that you can send in. And both these, of course, are limited by the amount of time that you have in a day. The amount of effort per application, obviously, if you put more effort into application, it takes more time. It also would probably increase your chances of being accepted. At the same time, the chance of getting any job is probably more a function of whether or not how many applications you've actually put in total. And the reason I think it's more important to play a numbers game than it is, for example, to make sure that each and every one of your applications is pristine is because you'll probably run out of energy and time. Because the fact is, a lot of your applications, you might be applying to a company that just has a job opening but doesn't actually care about hiring somebody. Or they might not actually even get to your resume. So if you see like someone like one of the FANG companies, and I think that's probably for most applicants, FANG being Facebook, Amazon, Apple, Netflix, and Google. And there's a few other big tech companies there. If you're applying to a giant company and they have 5 spots to fill in a group, and you're getting 1,000 applicants, they only need to find enough people to fill those 5 spots. So the fact is, you might not even actually, there's a good chance they won't even see your application. The person will come in, they'll look through, they might see the first 50. Of those first 50, they've probably found enough people and they can fill that in. So my warning there is that you might put a massive amount of effort into an application that will never be seen. And I wouldn't suggest people, your time is valuable and you shouldn't burn up your energy that way. And so from that perspective, it's more important that you have a larger total number of applications. There's probably another factor about who will actually see your application. If it's a smaller company or more local company, you probably have a better chance at actually people seeing the application and going farther. And so for these types of things, just to put these into practical terms, I think there's like LinkedIn Easy Apply is one example. Companies that essentially let you send in your CV, and and with like a small, it's not usually even expecting a cover letter now. They just allow you to give an extra sentence or two, sort of customizing yourself and introducing yourself and drawing attention to aspects of your CV that are of interest. I think that might be actually the best way to go. So I know a lot of giant companies that actually do something where they feed your CV into this automatic reader and then it spits it out into a form and things like that. Honestly, I think that's one. It seems like bad engineering on my part, because in the time it takes you, why design an algorithm that's just going to analyze someone's CV and put it into a different format? A CV is meant to be organized in a way that's easily readable and things like that. So the fact is, it seems like an extra step that's more likely just to mince up your CV. So things like Easy Apply, where you just put in your CV and maybe a personal note to customize. I think that's a very good way to sort of optimize, put in a significant number of, applying a large number of times, while also putting in a reasonable amount of effort per application. And of course, that does mean that you need to be, of course, going to make sure that your CV is good and cleaned up. That is the optimal amount of effort, because that's what everyone's going to see. One thing that I noticed is that a lot of the undergrads and MSc students who I was talking to hadn't actually gone to their university's careers, their careers department or careers assistants to get their CV brushed up in. And I would just quickly say, the people in these departments, they typically do have specialists for people in technical fields. So you don't have to worry about, it's like, oh, this person's not going to know how to make a data scientist or an engineer or statistician's CV shine. They do have people who specialize in that, and you're really wasting an opportunity if you just don't go to them and say, please help me brush up my CV. And even if you've graduated, typically they help you for an extended period of time because they want their graduates to get jobs. So I would just say, if you haven't done that, definitely go do that. It's what I did when I was applying, and it definitely helped me out. I had one of, oh yes. Also keep in mind that if you're a member of the American Statistical Association, or even if you're not, last year we actually did a CV check. So what I would suggest that you do, which basically means that a lot of undergraduate students and MSc students sent in their CVs for experienced people to mark them up, send them back with suggestions. And I would strongly suggest that you take advantage of that. You should probably have it run by your university system first, get it that initial buff, and then run it by the expert and see if they can just catch anything extra. So I think that's probably the initial way to do the initial cleanup, and then an extra shine. All right, the next bit is I think another important question that doesn't really get addressed a lot, and really ought to, because this is your life, or how you're going to be spending a lot of your time. You should ask yourself, are you looking right now for a job or a career? And keep in mind that your company is paying you to do a job. They are not paying you, and they do whatever they say. They honestly probably don't care whether or not you have much of a career. They are paying you to do a job. There's one exception to this, of course. It's university systems. This is the problem with me going off script. But yeah, there's one exception. I think university systems or academia does actually have strong incentives to advance the careers of their young faculty. And that's because effectively you're never leaving the industry, and there's always this feedback. Whereas companies, on the other hand, they don't have they don't have that same motivation. And there's I think there's evidence to back this up. For example, there's some data that employees who change their jobs every few years have the fastest career growth. And I've heard like every year and a half, I've heard every 2 years, every 3 years have the fastest career growth. And so the quick takeaway from that is, well, if individual companies had a motivation to accelerate the careers of their employees, that would not be the case. It would be the employees who stayed the longest at companies who had the fastest career growth. So I think that's important to keep in mind. They aren't averse to your career growth. It's not a priority for them. They're paying you to do a job, and that's what they want. But you should figure out what you want, because if you do want a career, then not every job is going to put you on the right path. A job is necessary but not sufficient to have a career. So keep that in mind. And of course, if it's your very first job, you probably can't factor those aspects in too much. In that case, what you need to do is you just get your foot in the door, um, do a great job. It's fine just to get a job and start your career. And once you're farther along, ask yourself, will this particular job further my career? So be ready to pivot on that one. But if you are looking for a career, that you should clarify that to yourself, and that might tell you which job you would pick down the road. And I've done something quite similar to this, where I had a job that was, you know, marginally higher paying. I'm not going to say like, oh, I threw away a whole bunch, but it was substantially higher paying, but it seemed less likely to advance my career. And I'll say this, I might have gotten it wrong. It might have been that would have been the job that advanced my career, and I could have made a lot more. But, I just had to make a guess from where my skill set was, where I was hoping to be in a few years' time, where I thought I'd most likely to succeed. And yeah, so I just had to make that choice. And I'd suggest that depending on where you are, you make that, have that clear in your mind. And also what you want will change over time, most likely. So if you're looking to fill a few months between grad school, a job might be perfect. You don't have to say, well, this advanced my career. But you should definitely have that clear in your mind. And I guess, when Kim and I were first talking about this, and trying to plan this out, the issue of the numbers game came up a lot because, we see a lot of these things like data scientist is the sexiest job of the 21st century and all these things. And that there's going to be a, 90 billion data scientist shortage by next year or something like that. And, all these numbers. And what I'm worried about is that it gives people a false sense that their data science job search will actually be quick and easy. And it's typically not going to be. One of the reasons that there are all these openings that these companies are talking about is that companies don't feel like there are candidates suitable to fill these positions. And while initially you might think, oh, great, well then, they're going to love to hear from me because I'm super suitable. You might actually get lumped into the group of unsuitable candidates for one reason or another, including a particularly bad reason. I think that there are probably plenty. If there's one thing that talking to dozens of MSc and bachelor's degree students has taught me, and then it was further cemented by the experiences of these like very high quality doctoral students from elite institutions with really well documented successes, is that companies are really not good at actually figuring out what a suitable candidate is for their position. So good candidates do get thrown away all the time. And so the reason you need to play this numbers game is because I would simply say, interpret this, best job we need to fill these positions. Instead of saying, oh, it's going to be easy for me to get a job. I think a better way to interpret this is to say, if I keep playing the numbers game and try, I will eventually get a job. I think that's the way to interpret this data, that you'll have a long run chance at success as opposed to a long run effort and you'll never succeed. That's my personal opinion, but the fact is, a lot of this hype, and you'll of course hear it from universities and professional societies because it helps get membership, it helps get students. This does not mean you'll have a necessarily easy time getting a job. It just means that if you work hard afterwards, there will be a job at some point. Yeah, so here's another thing. I'll give you a minute to read the text here, because this is honestly, I'm not sure if this one is apocryphal or if it's made up. I didn't have time to do a quick research on that one, but I've seen a lot of stuff like this, and especially I've honestly seen plenty of cases where they want more years of experience, for example, in a technology than that technology has existed. And honestly, I think a great interview question for a data scientist, and I'd love it if someone actually took this up, is if a company asked their candidate to say, please list everything weird about the job description we just posted. I think that would actually be a really good way to actually identify good candidates, because it shows their ability to critically evaluate what the job post is and their willingness to be honest with an employer. But it does look like a lot of companies really did just sort of copy their descriptions from other companies' job descriptions, or even worse, they sort of mixed and matched from multiple companies. And I'm pretty sure that most people, if you've looked at the job descriptions out there, you'll see plenty of instances where it's like, this doesn't logically make sense, or you'll think, this set of criteria actually means that only about 1 in a million data scientists will actually meet these criteria if you take them literally. There's another issue here too. So basically, some of the common faults are that job descriptions tend to be over specific. And for example, they might require technical skills that could easily be learned on the job. But they then require, multiple years of experience in that skill, or, they require years of experience on a skill that frankly could be learned over a weekend. And very similarly, something that you'll notice, and I'm only saying this so that you don't get frustrated or think that you're crazy. But basically, a lot of companies seem to conflate that a data scientist uses technology X on a basic level daily with the idea that their data scientists must understand technology X at an expert level for their daily work. And this typical example of this, I think SQL comes to mind as an example of something where the job description on SQL literally don't make any sense, where effectively, I think a lot of data scientists will use SQL on a daily basis, but they use it at a very basic level. And then, every once in a while, they'll need to do something complex in SQL. And so it's some idea like that where it's sometimes you need to know a large number of technologies at a basic level. And that's not a very high barrier to entry in the mind of a data scientist. But for some reason, companies will use that to exclude perfectly well-qualified people. And as some, I guess, just random extra commentary on that, it sort of feels like what you might look for a contractor or a freelancer, where they're demanding that someone comes in with a skill set on day one, as if that person isn't going to be employed with them in 6 months' time or a year's time or 3 years' time. And so you might find that frustrating too, but there is a mismatch right there, and you just need to be prepared for it. With that said, of course, let me do that. Not everything that's hyper specific in a job description is actually goofy and wrong. So I think that when you look at these job descriptions, amidst all that fluff, there is actually a sentence or two pertaining to what they need to do. So there is a sort of a kernel of truth in that goofy job description. And I think the best way to figure that out is to go to the company's website, which you should be doing anyway, and figure out what they actually do. And put the pieces together. This has been very successful for me. Everyone says, do their homework. And I think that's sort of like, you can look at the company, you can look at its history. I'm not sure how much that works. I've done that stuff too. But what I think is probably more successful is you look at the job description. And this is particularly useful when you're going in for an interview. So I wouldn't say try to do all this research just to apply, because again, you're probably going to lose out on the play the numbers game. I have one caveat to this, which is if you see a job description for which you are hyper well suited, for example, they knock out the domain expertise and the technical skills that you require, that's one that you should bury down on and just try to do the best possible job. So I'd say just take two different strategies in your mind. That for the ones where there's a sort of goofy and non-applicable, play the numbers game and just apply. If you seem like you're going to be a really good fit for it, that's the one that you do some extra attention on before you even send in your CV, and you can change up your CV. And that actually worked funny enough for my current job. And one of the reasons that I really liked the idea of working for them was because their job description was like 3 lines of requirements. And they're just saying like, we need someone who knows time series analysis. They need to know stochastic optimization. And it would be great if they knew something about clinical trials. And I was just like, check. Yes, that like I have that. I'm not going to play the numbers game with them. Let me go check their website. I read through what they did as a company. I found out what their product was. And that way I actually then did a slight change on my CV so that it was tailored for them. And when their screening call came in by a person from HR, I straight up speculated on what they would want me to do as a data scientist and some of the initial challenges that would come up. And they really liked that because it meant that I was anticipating what their challenges might be in advance. It meant that I was thinking about it and critically evaluating it. And I know that might sound a little bit risky because you're like, oh, what if I just say something completely off the wall? and it's completely wrong. And I would honestly just put that fear out of your mind. Again, don't try to survive the process. Just try to maximize your chance of at least one time being very impressive. And so I honestly think that a company probably shouldn't. No sensible company is actually going to begrudge that of you. Where they say, "Oh, that was completely a wild guess. This person's nuts. I'm not gonna deal with them anymore." I don't think that will probably remove too many people. It actually just shows you're trying to get a grasp on things, and you're more likely than not going to hit a nerve of something that's like, "Oh, that's a really great idea. I hadn't thought of that." So I think this is one of those things where you swing for the fences, and try to be. No one is going to know that you failed miserably on a previous job interview. So you might as well try to come in as impressive as you can on each one. And that means you have to take a risk, and you might look foolish on one, but I don't think people will begrudge you for that. And if they do, you might not want to work for them anyway. A quick note on the technical review aspects. So technical reviews can take many forms. The upper end of technical screening process, and this is, if you look up Gail Lockman McDowell, she's pretty much your lady to go to for this. And so if you look at you can't miss her. If you just Google her name, you'll find her. You will find the technical passing or cracking the technical interview. And this is useful for both data scientists and software engineers. And if you're going to one of the upper end of technical screening, which are like the FANG companies, this is going to be of interest. And if you're several months out or a year out from being interested in one of those companies, prepare. Like, go through this book. This book is it's like an 800-page monster. It has about maybe 100 or 200 pages of instruction, and then just practice problems. But the technical interviews for these companies like this is very rigorous. You're not going to get past it just by coding in general. People with experience don't pass it. But if you do put the effort in, you are obviously looking at a highly lucrative job. And so if you're interested in working for some of the big tech companies, you need to start prepping on that one in advance. So that's on the upper end. And I think actually this helps clarify one quick thing. I made a quick note on this, that in many of these big tech companies, it does help clarify the conflation of data science and machine learning with the engineering skill set. And so it's highly divergent from, for example, research data science positions. So I think that's something that you might want to consider, that the research data scientist positions, for example, the skill set you're usually picking up in a university, is a bit different than the product and deployment-based data science and machine learning that you would need from for big tech. And the reason that they have this hyper rigorous screening process is to figure out, to make sure that you can actually really fit into their workflow. Now, on the medium end of things, on this technical review, there's basically the technical discussion of your work. So you might have to do a presentation followed by technical Q&A. And the main issue here is that it's making sure that you can basically critically assess the technical aspects of your own work. And this is another place where I'd honestly suggest that you take a risk, because by the time you're talking about these things, you're already in the door talking to the person. And the best way to take a risk, in my opinion, is to tell them where things went wrong technically with your previous research, previous projects where you messed up. And the reason that it's good to show those things isn't because it's going to show you that you mess up. It's going to show that you have the critical reasoning ability to identify when you mess things up, and that you take those lessons forward with you in the future. There's something worse than a person who makes mistakes. It's the person who made zero mistakes because they don't know any of their mistakes. And so I would strongly advise that it makes a very good way to engage the person, because also if they're technical, they've made technical mistakes too. So I would strongly advise that, for example, when you're trying to turn your previous experiences, your technical experiences, into a story, one of the best ways to do is say, here's a time when a data science project fell on its face, and here's how I saved it. Or here's how, like, a domain expert, and frankly, the domain expert could have failed to communicate with you, but for whatever reason, there's a miscommunication. Here's how I resolved that issue. There's always going to be problems in the technical fields, and it's the people who can identify those problems and resolve them and bring them forward, who I think are best equipped. So that is sort of the medium end, where you have to qualify your technical work. On the low end, there is no low end. So basically, you're going to have to critically assess your technical work. Set yourself up to do this. The best way to set yourself up to do this is to do real life projects. And I'll try to discuss this in a more free form way a little bit later. And sort of the final note that I wanted to go on are the advantages of early career data scientists and statisticians, because I recognize that it might feel weird that a lot of the advice that you're going to hear is from people who are farther along in their career than you are. And that makes sense. Those are the people you want to follow and get advice from. At the same time, you might find yourself wondering, well, like, how can I possibly compete and get a job with all these other people as candidates as well? So I did actually compile a list of advantages that I think early career data scientists have over people who are later in their careers. And I'm going to take a quick sip of water, and then I will tell you that list. I think that has built sufficient levels of suspense. And actually, my main thoughts around this are it's based on the idea of opportunity costs. And I come from an economics background, but I think that this is a very, very important concept to have when you're trying to figure out what your particular advantages are. One example of an opportunity cost is that you actually have the time to practice for a technical interview. If somebody is in their mid-level career and they're already hyper engaged, as I mentioned before, this book here it's a 600 or 800 page monster. It takes a while. You have to be practicing for, I think it's advised, a few hours per day, and at least 1 hour per day for 1 to 2 months. And while someone in a managerial position might not have the time to be able to do that, somebody who's an undergrad absolutely has the time to be able to do those things. And also those topics are typically fresher because they're revolving around things that, for example, are in an undergraduate or introductory computer science course. Now, also in a job, so say you do get a job, how can you actually still compete? Because there's some competitive. You need to show that you're adding value in comparison to these other alternatives. If you are in, for example, a lower paying data science job, an introductory data science job, you might have the advantage that you can stop work at 5 p.m. and focus on a side project or research with a local university that will help build your career up further. Whereas a senior person might typically have job obligations that go past 5 p.m., especially if they are very career-oriented as well. So there are things like that where effectively, when the clock stops, you can go and keep building your own career. Alternatively, you might be able to outwork, more experienced people with other job obligations. So, for example, again, if you have a more senior person, but they're doing a lot of management work, well, that leaves an opening for you to tackle the, gritty technical aspects, or just to spend the time required to just wrangle more data and things like that. So, your boss will appreciate that because effectively you're doing things that they don't have time to do. You're adding value. You're making yourself indispensable, because you are able to do those gritty technical things that they don't have time to do. So basically, you try to just identify where you can add value and exploit that. I was actually thinking about this earlier, about the idea that I wouldn't actually want to compete head on with myself from about 7 years ago. Even though I've had substantially more skill and substantially more experiences since then, there are many different dimensions along which people can shine. And so when you're early career, you should understand what those dimensions are and really try to exploit those advantages. And so, if you have a lot more time to put towards things, you can work hard on that. You have energy. Like I start getting sleepy at 10 p.m. now. Whereas, a few years ago, I was working until, much later than that. But the main point in that is that you should not feel as if you're at a definite disadvantage compared to more experienced statisticians or data scientists. You do have your own advantages, and it's just important to keep that in mind so that you can work towards them. I had actually another quick note, actually, while I'm thinking about this. I had missed it earlier that so a lot of this advice is actually more based around the data science job description than it is a lot of the statistical job description. So I think one of the advantages, and I've gotten jobs as a statistician as well, and I've looked at the job descriptions. The statistical hiring process, for example, for a biostatistician, is a much more well-defined. It's a much more well-run path. And so I think that if you are looking for statistician roles, there's probably a lot less variance on those aspects. So keep that in mind that there are a lot of aspects with data science that don't necessarily translate exactly into the job market for statisticians. And at the same time, of course, there are a lot of data scientists who aren't qualified to operate as statisticians because of their particular skill set. So there's a bit of a disconnect there. But that's about it. I had some other ideas. I was actually. Oh, Kim, did you want to say something?
Yeah, no, I just wanted to say that was great. Thanks for sharing that. It was interesting, actually, your last point about not wanting to compete with yourself from when you were younger. Just, I can say, even as a consultant, I'm just going to tell everyone I'm turning 40 this year, and I realized just even 5 years ago what I would have been willing to try to learn or try to tackle, or something just in terms of doing something new in order for for a new client or something. I'm not willing to do those things anymore because I've got to practice. I've got commitments to things I'm already doing. People kind of know me for my current skill set, and I just wouldn't be willing to compete with myself from 5 years ago when it came to something new. So I think that was a great point. And I did see a couple of things that people brought up in the chat. I don't know if you wanted to stop and look at that right now.
Yeah, I see Melanie's question. Yeah. Should we start with that? Is that or sorry, there's a ton. Sorry. Yeah. Well, let me widen my screen some. And oh man, and actually I'm pretty excited because I have a second camera that I've set up for paper and pencil drawings of ideas, because I had some other ideas I wanted to illustrate to you guys that I thought might be helpful. Right. So hopefully someone will give me the excuse. Glenn's background looks like a virtual background. I can actually assure you that it is not. As you see this pin, man, actually I don't want to throw a pin at my wall. Here, this is better. 1 second. You can see this. Where I'm gonna go for the plant, okay? So as you can see, the thing interacts with the plant. It's not a raptor popping out of the bushes. But yeah. It does. We revamped the studio. Yeah.
I assumed that was a virtual background. Actually, I'm very impressed.
Yeah. Some work definitely went into it. Okay. But now on to something where you reviewing job descriptions before an interview. Save job descriptions to your computer when you apply, because often the job description announcement disappears. Yes. Oh, yes. That is actually a very important point. In my current job, that precise thing happened. So I was precise. Like this was the job where it was literally, I could not have written a better job description for myself than what they put up there. And they didn't, when they replied to me saying we're interested in your data science, to bringing you in to talk, they didn't tell me which position. They did not re-include the job description, and I had to go back into the files, and it wasn't even in my files. It was in my what's it called? My Sublime text. So literally just like my free text thing, and I had to go back and find it. So that is a very good point. You should be keeping all those because you don't know who's going to ask for what. I create a folder for each job and also save the CV, resume, and cover letter. Great material. Oh, that's a good point. One other thing is I actually keep a Google Drive. So I have a Google Drive that has my CV. It has 2 CVs. One, my just plain old CV as it is, and 2, a highlighted CV. So the things where, since it's getting kind of long, I highlight the cool stuff that people should draw their eye to. And then it also contains, this is for people come from more of an academic background, but it contains my publications as well. So that one saves me the step of when people say, can you send me your publications? And just lets them review them outright. So yeah, I think that is very useful. And then you effectively have a little job package that you can send in. And since you typically aren't dealing with the hiring manager to begin with, and you're dealing with someone from HR, the manager who's gonna, actually who you're gonna work for, that usually can be sent on to the technical team, and they can review you more rigorously. Now into Melanie's question: is there an equivalent technical review resource for those in research data science field? So I've thought about this a bit. And I would say this is the difference between companies. Basically, I'll pop out a few ideas and then I'll hopefully try to connect them. One thing is, let me put this down. Sorry, I don't need my notes. One thing is that there are companies that produce services, for example, consultants. And there are companies that produce products, like software companies. And actually, I have my, for those who have been on the podcast, my friend Richard Franzese and I, when we were giving advice, we always bifurcate our advice because I come from a company that produces products. He comes from a more research position that does services. And so the skill set difference is one such that we do tend to focus on different things. And the reason I bring that up is because when you're in that more research field, you tend to be producing services more. Effectively, your specific area of the job is services. You aren't needing to deploy as much for the data science. You're not needing, for example, to like deploy your data science models on AWS. Deployments might be more things like dashboards and things like that. And one thing that I did, and this is another thing that is useful. The technical review of people in research is the obviously the publication review process. And so I know that's sort of like a completely orthogonal topic, but it is something where when you ask yourself, what am I going to provide to my company? What value am I going to provide? One easy thing to provide if you are a research statistician is to say, for example, you're not going to be embarrassed by having your paper retracted because your stats were wrong. That's one that I used to get a job once, and it's a very compelling reason. So I know that's not quite the same as saying, look at this book. You might find the book interesting. It only costs the book only costs about $20, and you can just flip through it and see what it's like. But it is a large amount. It is coding tests. But no, I think the main issue with that is, and I'd be more than happy to admit I was wrong if someone had a better example, but I think that technical review aspect is a definitive difference between typical academic research applications and some of these more product-drawn software company data science roles. If someone has an alternative example, I'd be happy to discuss it, though.
Yeah, and feel free also, everybody, to unmute yourselves or, talk directly with us as well. We'd be happy for that too.
Cool. So now we have Sanjana, who says, this is a good one. Actually, this brings up some good points that I was hoping to discuss and use the camera for. So I'm going to graduate in 2022, and based on my past internship positions by data scientists and analysts, which is one very important thing to note, data scientists and data analysts are different job roles. They sometimes get squished together when the person writing the job description gets confused, but by and large, those are different roles with different expectations. And there are some very good resources to look for. Honestly, just YouTube search data scientist versus data analyst. I think there's some guy called like Dan the Data Analyst or something like that, and he gives very good descriptions on that. But anyway, I'm on the fence about joining a larger company compared to startups or small companies where I can enjoy the work better. Do you have any thoughts about this factor's life and how it affects career opportunities? Yes, I have very strong opinions on this because I had to make the exact same choice myself. So right out of grad school, so my PhD work was in patient vital sign monitoring. So basically I did Bayesian time series modeling of patient vital signs, for example, from wearables. And I went and worked at a company, a startup that did precisely that. And they're going to be a huge company. You're going to hear about them someday. They're going to be great. In fact, they are doing very great already. But there was the question, it's like, do you basically leverage your fresh out of school to go for a giant company, which of course will have a much larger compensation. It'll be much better structured, as in people will know better probably what to do with data scientists. Or do you go for a smaller company where you might have effectively people are less sure your job role is more ambiguous, but you might like the work more, and things like that. And of course, I did choose the smaller company that was extremely aligned with my career. So again, this was I chose my career, not a job. So this job was aligned with my career. Um, there are significant advantages to the work that you enjoy more. One, you're going to work harder. Two, you're going to learn more. And either of those two are going to put you farther ahead than someone who essentially becomes apathetic and stops learning as rapidly as they could. So I think that's one thing to keep in mind. You do have to keep up your level. You have to understand about yourself what motivates you, and nothing motivates people more than actually working on a topic that they love. And especially if you are very early in your career, this is the time to be. If you want to have a career, this is the time to put in a lot of effort and work into it. And so while you still have time for things like that. So at the same time, most companies overall don't know actually how to advance a data scientist career. So it is a bit patchwork. People don't know how to manage data scientists. People in big software companies don't know how to manage data scientists. Because it is a new career. It is not like software engineering where they have some agile framework by which people can deliver value. This is much more nebulous. It's a weird combination of research and sort of like software deployment. So yeah, it is a nebulous issue. Some companies are farther along in figuring it out than others, but I apologize. Like I know that seems like I'm literally just re-describing both sides, but
I'm actually a little bit curious, Glenn, if you could maybe, I know I see Andreas also asked a question about career versus a job. And so when you talk about career, like I'm seeing that as kind of maybe the higher aims, like the things you want to do down the road, maybe things like and when you distinguish that from a job, it makes me think about like, for example, I do a lot of work with the ASA because I really enjoy helping other people learn about statistics and data science and just kind of expanding it as a field as well, as just doing the work that I do. What are the distinctions that you're making, like personally, between career and job? Like, how would you define career the way that you're talking about it versus job?
Yeah. So for me, your career is something that happens over the sort of continuum of your productive existence. So sort of the idea that a career is what you have built up over time, the totality of your productivity in a certain endeavor. And I think that Kim is actually, I've thought about this. Kim is a very interesting example of how a career and job can become very well conflated. Because when you are a consultant, for example, doing these jobs is building your career. So I think that consultancy is an example of where these two things can be very well aligned. And I guess maybe, Kim, you could probably think of examples, though, how if you were non-strategic in how you did things, you could actually jump from consulting job to consulting job and not be building a career at the same time, because just have it not be well aligned, or if you don't do a good enough job.
I'm weeding out occasionally of things that don't appeal to me, or I don't think you're going to go in a direction that I want. And I can do that because I work for myself, but as you're saying, like, you don't do that if you have a more, I'm going to say more typical situation, although I don't even know if that's true. You don't necessarily get to pick and choose for yourself everything that you do at your job, right?
Yeah. Yeah. So, I mean, if you look at, and I'll just, Kim and I will forgive each other about making assumptions about each other's careers, I guess. We'll make a forgiveness pact on that one. But like when Kim's talking about weeding out jobs, what she's doing is effectively she's curating her jobs so that they align and create a cohesive career.
I agree with that.
Yeah. And, there's many things that, which clients she takes up, which topics she picks up. So maybe there's times where you might have had a client who's doing something that's a little bit off the beaten path from what you're used to, but at the same time, they are a reliable client. And so it sort of meshes well together. At the same time, or a new client who's doing something that you're very accustomed to. And so essentially trying to weave those things together, I think, is a very useful thing. There's actually an interesting statistic, and this might be nonsense what I'm about to say, but I've heard the statistic where they say like people change their careers, like have 7 careers over the course of their lifetimes. And when I was just thinking, okay, so someone approximately from the age of 22 to 65, okay, so there's 43 years, more or less. Divide that by 7. Those don't sound like careers to me. That sound like you just had 7 jobs. And so I think that there is something there where, like, if you're changing careers so much, you're probably not actually having careers. You're probably just having jobs. And so I think that those two things are different. it helps. And I'm not saying I'm not even perfect at curating these things for myself, but I do recognize that it's an issue. There are bits where I think, oh, well, I could have organized this better or done this instead of that, and that would have been better for my career. And when in fact I was doing a job. But yeah, sorry. Unfortunately, they're all in chronological order. But yeah, if is it Andrea who said that? Is that
Andrea did ask about the distinction between a career and a job?
Yeah, people just feel free to speak up if I haven't quite addressed that. But yeah, I think the career is something over a continuum. Oh, cool. Yep. All right. Are there some avenues to turn a job into a career given 3 years of industry experience in MSc in statistics? Of course, a PhD in management are options, but do you have other suggestions? Let's see. Yes. So you have something nice here, which is that you have multiple years of experience. You haven't, to be blunt, you haven't been fired yet, which means that you're able to do something. You're able to deliver value. And so the question is, how do you turn that into a career? Well, first thing I suggest is you find out what you want to do. You find out what the career is that you want to have. For me, my career is that I want to be one of the best people possible at designing algorithms that personalize to patients. That's something that means something to me. And I know that sounds weird and often the thing, but that's my thing. And that's what I want to do. And it applies to other bits as well. But that is the type of career that I want to have. Another aspect of my career is that I want to make other people better at these types of things too. So, for example, why I have a podcast. The podcast was not so that I could hear my, nasally voice for multiple hours per week. The goal of the podcast was to help other people get a better idea about, how they could be critically thinking and resolving their own data science issues. So they could be moving ahead and being respected in their field and making something of themselves as well. So that was the motivation, and that's the career that goes through in that. So the first thing that I'd suggest, getting back to your question, is how do you turn a job into a career? You need to find out what you want to do. You need to figure out what direction you're wanting to head in. And that makes things a lot easier. Then you figure out, is your current job meeting those needs? If it isn't, sounds like it's time to start putting out feelers. And it doesn't mean you need to change your job right away. But it does mean that you can even start moving that career. A lot of people, you can actually go to your boss and say, I'm doing X, I'd like to do Y now. And there are things like that. Like I work with people who they're like, I'm doing X, now I want to do X plus Y divided by 2. Or, things like that. And so I think you need to figure out what direction you want to take. And, and then constantly reevaluate it and not beat yourself up when you get a little bit wrong and you need to recalibrate and renavigate. So yeah, I'd say those things are important. Oh, and actually, what I'm thinking about, there's nothing wrong with just talking about what you want to do next. So, other than PhD in management, do you have any other suggestions? One, I'm not necessarily sure that having a PhD will advance your career, depending on what exactly you want to do. I have one myself. I've thought a lot about whether it was worthwhile. I wouldn't trade it for. There are a few things for which I would trade it, but there are. I wouldn't say that having a PhD is necessarily a magic cure to your career challenges. Like, Kim?
Oh, actually, there was a question that was submitted in advance too, and maybe you can kind of roll that into this. Is just what does it look like out there in terms of jobs?
Yes.
In terms of like getting a bachelor's or having a bachelor's or a master's or PhD. What will?
Yes, I actually brought this up. So there is on datasciencepr.com. You can actually look at this thing called the Data Science Jobs Report. And actually, the thing to Google search is Data Science Jobs Report 2020 by 365 Data Science. And this was something that was published 10 months ago. I'm not able to see the exact date, but it had this thing added up. And
what did you say was the thing to Google? I'm gonna.
Yep, it's Data Science Jobs Report 2020 by 365 Data Science.
Got it. All right, I'm going to put the link in the chat for everyone.
Yeah, and it actually had, let me zoom in. it had the number of most sought out degrees in educational experience. And of those jobs, it looked like, where's that thing? I saw it in here. It was about 40% of jobs expected a bachelor's degree, about 40% expected a master's degree or some combination of that. And I know that those numbers aren't going to perfectly add up, but it was actually a very small percentage that required a PhD. I think, unfortunately, they labeled one of their tables wrong. But yeah, it was something where, oh, here it is.
Yeah, I see one where they've broken it down according to degree and also,
company size?
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. So there it is. So they're breaking it down by company size, which then obviously brings in the extra additive factor there. But yeah, so I would say this. You obviously need a bachelor's degree. I don't think anyone's doubting that. The question is, like, given where you are, how can you get a job? And I would say, I bet that a lot of, these are just if you're cold emailing, and this will actually be an excuse for me to bring out my my pen and paper. But that is if you are cold emailing, cold contacting to get a job. If you, for example, have had an internship that you've been doing and with a company, I would imagine those stats completely don't apply to you because they already know who you are. You're a known entity. They know if you're good or not. And so the risk is mitigated. And so one concept that I wanted to cover was this idea about delivering value. What a lot of people don't realize, and I think that people get frustrated because they say, I'm looking for an internship or I'm looking for a job, and the job said that I need experience in order to get this job. So every job it says I need experience, but then how will I get a job experience if I can't get a job because you need experience? Or even an internship will not actually, so I'm just trying to get the thing to focus. The internship won't accept me until I have a job. And I think that's because the value that you add to a company is a function of time, how much effort you put in. And what I think a lot of people don't realize is that for a large portion of the initial time that they're working at a company, oh man, the best laid plans.
I can read it well enough, Glenn.
Oh, well enough. Okay.
Yeah.
Cool. It's that I think for a lot of time, people are actually operating on this zero line. Oh, that doesn't help at all. The idea is we're operating along the zero line for a long period of time. One of the reasons that people like PhDs or people with master's degree students is because a lot of time that initial zero, operating on the zero value added, can be done in almost any job. And so the issue here, you learn how to work independently. You learn how to prioritize your data wrangling, your data analysis, how to communicate and get on the right track. And that zero line can be done almost anywhere.
Does that mean you basically bring the same value to the company that they are expending on you when you?
So this is just on value added. Now here is the cost below, and I'm going to fill that in next.
So we're not including like what they're spending on you in that value added. That's just what are you?
Correct.
That wasn't there already.
Correct. So the current cost is of course a constant, because you're taking a salary, right? So your current cost is a salary constant, and it's above zero for the entire time. And even if they are not paying you anything in an internship, well, then the cost is their time. But the further issue is that this cumulative cost over time.
Cost is their time, which is actually money.
Yes, exactly. And that cumulative cost grows over time. And so what we have here is effectively, you are not delivering value for an extended period of time. While you learn the ropes, and it's completely natural that you have to spend time learning the ropes. But the fact is, you are costing them something from day one, and you're delivering something of value at day 100, 200. I mean, sometimes it can take a while for you to add value. And there's always the question, will this person ever add value at all? And I think that's a very important thing to keep in mind from the perspective of your employer. And one of the reasons that's very important to do your research and do your homework on these companies when you're going in for a job interview is that you can better get an idea about how you're going to immediately add value right there. The reason when I say I'm going to speculate about here's probably what your data science problem is, here's one way that I'd suggest trying to solve it, and here's probably the problems that I'm going to encounter while trying to resolve it. It's saying that I'm already working out how to avoid being on this line and immediately hop up to that first place. And I think that's the most important perspective to have, where people, when I say that an employer's hiring someone to do a job, you should be very good at articulating what value you're going to add that's worth that expense. Because they're thinking about it. And when they say, these data scientists are getting paid really well, yeah, they are. But at the same time, that's a big cost, and you need to, you need to show that you have that value. Anyway, there's a little picture that I drew, and I think that's. I'm gonna switch back cameras now, but I think that's a very important thing, so that people can train themselves to start thinking from the perspective of what their employer is looking for and how they can add that value. Yeah. And actually, and another quick thing, one of the reasons why I think a lot of PhDs have an advantage in this field is not only one because they've gotten off that zero line, but also because by virtue of them writing and publishing, they're much better at articulating the value that they're adding and the challenges that they're willing to overcome. So, actually, this was one of my suggestions, that even if you don't have, for example, a PhD or a master's degree, the best thing that you can do is sit down and write out your data science journey. You write it out and you read it and say, does this sound good? What makes sense? What doesn't make sense? And in the process of reviewing it and revising it, you're going to get much clearer about why you're doing things. So writing is one of the best weapons that you have to actually show your value. And it's actually worth noting that my highest batting average for actually getting job offers was not after my PhD. And part of that was because literally I only applied to like a few jobs. It was after I had immediately finished my master's degree thesis. So I was hot off writing a whole bunch and writing and explaining why I could do these things. And it was a project that was tractable and people could understand. And so when I was going to these job interviews, I had it like on the tip of my tongue, very good at communicating what the value was, what the challenges were, and things like that. And so I think that that's something that's, you can never underestimate this. And actually, it's I'll bore you guys with an anecdote. I don't mind staying longer if to the extent that people find it valuable. But the anecdote was that I talked to a lot of younger career statisticians and data scientists, and one of the things that I was telling one of them was, it's like, you need to be working. It's like, here's a conference, you can write a small paper and publish it and things like that. And what the data scientist said to me was, well, I'm not interested in publishing, therefore I don't want to do this. To which I said, that's not the point. The point is that you write. And the point is that you write well enough that other people accept what you write is a good idea. And therein lies the value. That it's not peacocking where you're just trying to show off what you've done and publish for the sake of publishing. There's a place in the world for that. It's academia. I love academia. But there's a place for just that. But all in all, you always need to write, because that is where you're going to most critically evaluate and rigorously evaluate. It's where all the pieces fall out. And so I think the value in writing that. And as a quick final note, the value of writing out my notes as I had there, I revised those several times. And that helped me really stretch out these ideas and really figure out what the bounds of my advice were. So yeah, sorry, Kim, you've been waiting.
No. Actually, I was going to add something to that now that you bring that up. Just in general, writing and just being prepared to talk about, what you do and what you can bring to something. I know we focused on a more formal job search where you go out and you search out opportunities. And actually, that was a question I was going to have for you too, if we have time for it. But you never know when you're going to run into somebody or meet somebody who could also set you on a track to your next job or even, move you forward on your career. I actually had this is one of my favorite anecdotes. I had someone that lived in my neighborhood found out that I, had my own consulting business. And I've occasionally considered hiring people, although I haven't yet. And they gave me their information. They were like, yeah, if you're looking to hire anybody. And I just said, oh, well, what kinds of things do you work on? What would you like to do? And they literally had no answer. And so clearly I wasn't going to put time and effort into thinking what I could come up with for that person to do. And so, just having that, like you phrased it, on the tip of your tongue and being able to talk about it would be a huge advantage in those kinds of situations.
As a quick sort of experiment, if the person, when you asked them, had said, well, I'm willing to do, say, X, Y, and Z, and you didn't need them to do those things, would you have still had a better impression of them?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Even if I didn't need those things, I might think about how I could use those things.
Yeah.
Or then I know what they do and they are a neighbor, and I may know because they were an engineer, I'm a statistician, not quite lined up, but maybe I know people who would be interested in that. So yeah, absolutely. And it would have definitely.
So yeah, I mean, so getting back to the idea that like, if you tried to speculate or estimate what the person might need, even if you get it wrong, you're better than not trying at all, and you make a much better impression. And just the process of trying to estimate what they need does put you in the mode of eventually finding what the right answer is. You don't need to get these things right on the first try, but everyone's willing. The job market is about exchanging money for value, and the reason you are worth it, if you can find a person who's willing to generate you 6 figures of value, you're more than happy to pay them 6 figures of money in order to do that. In fact, it's a wonderful exchange. Like, wouldn't you love to find someone who could generate you, just to put a number, $500,000 of value out there? And what are you willing to pay them for that? I don't know, something pretty close to $500,000, like plus minus a little margin. But so,
sure.
It's a wonderful experience if you can actually see this person will definitively add value, and the only thing I have to do is exchange money for it. Like that's so much easier. And I know that it's a little bit hard. Yeah.
That's an easy math problem for someone looking to hire.
Yeah, and you're like so if you get some of these things wrong, at least it starts the conversation. But if you don't bother at all, it means that you haven't even started. It means that your gut feeling, your intuition isn't to try to work to solve people's problems. For me in my own job, like working to solve people's problems, when I talked to this company, the company that ultimately hired me, I should have said, here's my area. We seem to be very well aligned in most and pretty much everything you want. I suspect that your main problem is, and I basically said, like, I think you're probably right now working off some rules-based systems, and you're looking for data-driven systems. And your rules-based systems are probably very good and expert-driven, and you're looking for alternatives, and to see where that will lead us. And that started the conversation. And I said, here are the problems, here are the advantages of what you're doing right now. Here are the problems that will probably arise as I try to create a solution as an alternative. And here's even the problem with me measuring how much I'm improving. So I'll actually say, like, we can probably improve it more than we'll even be able to measure. And I'd use these metrics to measure it. And so that's what I was saying, like, oh, well, how is Glenn paying for himself? Well, it's like this. And he realizes there's some fuzziness. So we'll have to work extra hard to make sure at least those metrics are there. But I didn't stop there. Like I have a new boss now within the same company. And I'm trying to figure out how to make her job easier. Like they've already hired me, and I'm still trying to say, okay, what makes my boss's life easier? How can I help her? How can I basically make these things go well? So the job doesn't end, but you do need to be approaching it from that. And I assume consultants are probably, you've had to be very precise about, what you're adding, because the transaction is right there. So maybe is that the case?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I end up working with a lot right now. I'd say the majority of my clients are actually students who are working on their doctorates. And they have been told, you probably do want to work with a statistician in a lot of cases. And so they can literally take how much they're going to pay me and weigh that against maybe enrolling in another semester because they weren't able to do the stats themselves, and see very literally where that value is coming for them in that kind of situation.
Yeah, that's interesting, because basically it means that your fees are effectively, you have a good benchmark. And I have to say, which actually brings up another interesting question. So effectively, if you are producing this, do you feel, while you are obviously fundamentally providing a service to them, by the fact that it's people in a similar situation, have you managed to effectively productize that service such that you are better at sort of providing them the precise value that they need? So productized, by which I mean, like, effectively you can, you've gone through this process enough times with the clients that what sort of the like second order and third order pitfalls are. Yeah. And so you can prep, and you have effectively a package.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I mean, I do work in other situations too that aren't quite so well defined, but that is like, in terms of volume of clients, that's where I work the most. So I've been able to do that and say, here's what you can avoid down the road. I work with a lot of the same schools now because they've taken note and they pass on my name. And so I kind of even know specifically one university from the other where the pitfalls are going to be. So
yeah. And that's a huge service, because I mean, you have to understand if there's a special requirement that gets you passed at blank state, and then there's U of blank that has a different requirement, then obviously those things, understand those things. And I think that can immediately be transferred even if you're working within a company. That if you can essentially be pumping out the same level of value, and especially because if you can make it more efficient. And when you're machine learning, what you actually do is you start automating one job. And then so essentially that gets passed out, and that lets you start working on the next job. So you're essentially, whatever progress you've made previously, there's a much smaller, this thing goes up very rapidly because effectively you're able to reproduce those initial values at a much lower cost to begin with. And I think looking for things like that, places where you can automate work, I think is very useful. Also to understand, so that you understand, your meta problem better. But I had some other notes, but if anyone just even if you don't have a well-defined question, but you just want to say, do you want to riff off this idea or that idea for a bit? It's more than welcome.
Could I jump in with some comments? So it's not just two of you are speaking.
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay, great. So comment number one, probably I should say a little bit about myself. So I'm associate professor of medicine and was recently promoted to a full professor. So now I feel that I'm in
Congratulations.
Thank you, between mid-level and senior level. But I'm a biostatistician. I have PhD in statistics. So I serve as the chair for search committees when we hire biostatisticians at different MS and PhD level. And I really wanted to clarify on what Glenn mentioned. At universities, usually the search committee is very formal. I mean, the search process is very formal. If the search incorporates HR, then all applications will be considered. It doesn't matter how many applications we are getting, 1,000, for example, but your application will be considered for sure. But if you do not meet the minimum qualifications posted in the ad, then basically it will be discarded. In many cases, So it's kind of a first thing to keep in mind. So thank you for mentioning, diversity in the job search processes. But in academia, I think it's more formal for sure. I obviously have to point that if a position is simply a research position for students or postdoctoral associate position, then usually this really depends on your professor. It's up to him or her how many applications he or she should consider, and maybe not even consider any except for one that he or she likes. Another comment I wanted to make, I have that impression, I don't know if you agree with me. I was a faculty at statistics department for 10 years before coming to the College of Medicine, and also I graduated from Department of Statistics. My impression is that universities host career fairs more commonly for engineering and computer science students rather than statistics and data sciences. Maybe for data sciences, for data scientists now it's a new trend. But my impression that they are well organized and well attended by engineering and computer science students. So I don't know if you agree with me or not, but I would also comment, if you feel that your university does not have a career fair for your interests, for your statistics or biostatistics interests, then maybe you can benefit from career fair offered by joint statistical meetings. I mean, at the joint statistical meetings of the essay. So that's the second comment I wanted to make. And maybe one more. I don't know. I hear everyone is saying you really need to choose a career that you will love. And it's independently on what, if it's some kind of talk in sociology, psychology, engineering, it really doesn't matter. However, I think that we are all very different. We are all in very different circumstances. And I would not give this advice, as a general suggestion. But I can give you an example. I think that sometimes people are very spoiled and they think that basically they really need to love something, otherwise they will not make themselves to invest time. But there are different circumstances. If you are an international student, for example, and your visa expires and you really need to get a job to stay in the country because you already know your country doesn't offer jobs for scientists, it's a different story. So that's my kind of comment, more philosophical to think about, I think.
Yeah.
Thank you very much, both of you. I really enjoyed your talk, Glenn, and thank you, Kim, for organizing it.
You're welcome. Thank you for your thoughts.
Yeah. So maybe we should. Those are good points. I've made the bullet points. Maybe let's just go through them backwards. So that we so in order. First of all,
and I can stay about another 10 minutes. By the way.
Oh, okay. Should we?
But I can stay another 10 minutes or so. Rick, are you okay with another 10 minutes? If Rick is there, maybe.
Yeah, I'm fine for another 10 minutes. That's
okay,
fine.
Great. All right, thanks.
All right, cool. Yeah, I'll make these points as quick as possible. You're correct that a lot of students, for example, who are on visas and their visas are about to expire, those are probably about half of the students who I was talking to. And I was talking about a few dozen students with MSCs and bachelor's degrees. They are in that position, and I think they very much do fall into the position of that they need a job. And that, you think about your career second and you get a job and you get your foot in the door and you show them what you can do. Career that you can love. No, I think that I do very much agree with you on this one. I don't think that you should choose a career because you love it. I think you should choose something you're good at. And that's something that you can add value to. And you know what? You generally turn out to love those things you can add value to because It's self-affirming. Mm-hmm. And so I would actually say the time that I loved, I talk about I want to be one of the best people out there at analyzing patient vital signs. And it's something that I'd like to do. I didn't love that. About 4 months into my project, I could not think of anything more that I wanted to do with it. I was pretty tired out in the project, but I kept trucking along and I got better at it. And then eventually I did see more of these opportunities until I actually found out that it's probably the most unbounded fields of research that are out there. So no, it's something where I did not love it to begin with. I got good at it. And then I loved it a lot. And I think that that's important. And you certainly are not going to be, it's a fantasy to say, oh, I'm going to do the job that makes me feel absolute ecstasy, every minute of every day. It's no, it's these small rewards throughout that make you sit down at a computer and code away for hours and anticipate. And so things you can stick with. So yeah, no, I think that's a weird fantasy. I think that the more we can sort of disabuse students of that, you'll understand that there's nothing wrong with feeling bored with a given job while still really looking forward to these explicit endpoints that do make you feel very fulfilled. And that's the way I operate.
And maybe another way to say that, if you don't mind me interrupting, is, I'm sitting here in my office right now. I got my cat over here and my dog over here. I'm I love them. I love my career as a career. It's a different kind of feeling that you would have toward, I do know people who apparently just love what they do so much they don't want to do anything else ever, but I do think that's rare. And, I love my career as a career. It's something I do keep wanting to do and I keep wanting to return to it, but that's not necessarily the same as loving my career, so
yeah,
way of thinking of it.
Yeah. And there's nothing wrong with being wired either way. I think the best thing you can do is recognize which way you are wired and working your life towards that. There's no reason that Kim should be like saying, oh, I'm not that person who 100% must do their career until 2 a.m. and then wake up at 7 a.m. and start again. If that's not who you are, don't try to be that. It will not be fulfilling. So basic life advice there. But no, I think don't be ashamed of who you are, and not the same way, don't be ashamed if you are the person who's like, I'm going to go nuts, and that's just the way it is. And so just identify who you are and operate along that. You'll do better in either way. Cool. The next point on that Julia said was engineering careers for statistics careers. I'll just honestly, this is gonna be a flippant answer for me. Yeah, that's probably true. Engineers build stuff. Statisticians don't always build stuff, and especially not right away. And I know that's a bit of my engineering bias on that one, but very quickly, for example, if you look at software engineers, a lot of the data science revolution actually came because of software engineers building these things that then collected the data that then we added value to. So I think that there is an issue here where the engineers are people who tend to have a little bit of that initial jump up from the zero line of value added. They are much closer. You don't have to invest as much in them before they're adding that immediate value. And that might be one of the reasons. Other is that people don't know how to manage data scientists. So it's not as well defined. The biostats question is, there's several things I would say about biostats. One is that biostatistics had a much larger portion. This is just a general idea that biostatistics used to have a very large market share of the total statistics work that went out there. And as the statistics field and the data science field and the general data analysis field have changed, biostatistics takes a smaller portion of that as a total market share, although it is still growing at the same time. So when you look at it, it's like, oh, the pond is growing. Biostatistics is growing too. It's just the pond's growing even faster. But biostatistics is interesting because it is still one of the much, I think, better defined, well-defined. People understand how to get value out of a biostatistician and things like that. Those are my off-the-cuff thoughts on that one. Quick other thing on the academic opportunities. If you are an MSc graduate, one very promising place to look is choose a country. Go look at their universities, look at their scientific research groups. A lot of them are looking for people who can do data scientists, analytics, informatics, and things like that. It was actually the job that I got coming out of an MSc, was working as a researcher for a research lab at Oxford University. And I think that this is an underappreciated place, an opportunity for MSc students, especially because while you're in your MSc and you have to do a research project anyway, you can be contacting these groups and doing projects with them, and they might want to hire you afterwards. They don't have to worry quite as much about that sort of jump up step, and therefore, you can add value a lot faster. So I think I just say, if you are looking for a job, very much consider looking at universities you don't become a professor there. Again, congratulations, Julia, but you can do a lot of very good research assistant work to get your foot in the door. And the thing is, you can have a running start by doing it while you're doing your work. Another quick thought is that define what area you want to work in and then look at surrounding areas. I've seen a lot of people who say, for example, I want to work in pharma, when in reality, what they want to do is work in life sciences, biotech, healthcare, things like that. So make sure that you aren't over narrowly defining your search parameters on that one. Cool. And with that, cool. Sorry, I'm trying to move to see. Were there any last minute questions? Cool. Sorry, let me read this last one. Should we stop for the day, or should I try to wing it in 1 second?
I think we probably need to end. I did try to answer this a little bit in the chat. Was, what if you take a job in academia and decide you want to switch to industry? Are there pros or cons to doing that? And what about vice versa? And my quick answer in the chat was basically, I left academia to go into another job, and I think there are advantages to doing that. People tend to view you as having a lot of experience and being able to meet certain standards when you've been in academia. And I think sometimes there's even a perception that you add more value than you do when you come out of academia. Yeah. And going the other way is much harder, I think.
Absolutely.
And I think it's just I won't get into too much why it is, because it's a very political thing, I think, trying to get back into academia. But I do think it's much harder to go the other way. And if you're still kind of at the beginning of your career and you're asking yourself, should I do academia? If you think that's something you'd want to do, I'd say do that first.
Yeah, don't leave. Yeah, because you're not going to be publishing while you're in industry. And if you're not publishing while you're in industry, then your academic career is stalling. And I don't see, unless or build $1 billion company. If you build $1 billion company, yes, academia will welcome you back. Alternatively, you need to publish.
I know one professor that I had when I was in grad school who went from industry back into academia, and it was sort of like he had a stellar reputation in industry, but even so, he still had difficulty with meeting certain academic, I don't know what you call it, like milestones. Like, for example, I just remember he had some issues getting certain awards or certain statuses in, national academic groups, because sometimes he still wasn't seen as a true academic, even though he was fabulous. So
yeah, I mean, the biostats profession tends to actually work that line much easier than many others, where they'll have that person who's essentially writing either academia and regulatory or academia and industry much more easily than I think some of these other ones. But yeah, again, it is hard, and you might be maybe just to wrap this up, if anyone had any further questions, should we maybe just I'll pop on another video call at some time in the future. We can just arrange a time and we'll just have another Q&A, and people just off the cuff. It won't be with this. I'll just pop people's Zoom link and we can just have a conversation. Would that help?
I'm sure that people would love that. Do you want to give people your email? How would you want people to contact you to let you know if they wanted to do that?
Maybe I was going to do the crappy thing and be like, oh, just email Kim and we'll sort this out.
I'm perfectly happy for that. Also, because I am the section communications officer for the section on statistical consulting. I mean, that's part of what I do is, connect our people in our section to whatever they need. So I'll give everyone my email address. It's right there in the chat, kim@krloveqcc.com. There's one last question that I think should have a short answer if we know the answer. I'm a statistics tutor in an academic setting and interested in transitioning to a data scientist role. What forums would you recommend on the ASA website that I go to with questions on this transition? And I don't know, but Glenn, I know you know more about the overall organization of ASA. You might know.
So I mean, the statistical learning data one, I'd actually say don't go to the forums. There are better ways to learn what you need to do. For example, if you don't have Python skills, go into Udemy and pick up Python skills, for example. And you can see some like Jose Portilla on Udemy, fantastic teacher who can do those types of things. To get in, you're sort of wanting to get into the swing of things towards data science is a very good resource. You can join the ASA section on statistical learning and data science. I'm program chair elective at this year. And it is a pretty good way just to sort of get your thumb on things. There's also the statistics and data science education section, which is another section of the ASA. And there's the young professional section. But yeah, I mean, data science is a much more nebulous thing. And the resources are scattered. So I would say definitely check in with those forums, but understand that you're going to need to find things else outward.
Thank you so much.
Learn things else. Yeah, cool.
Thank you.
Yeah, also podcasts, never a bad way. But yeah, cool. Yeah, we can have a maybe when we do the other thing, we can actually go into some details on some on where to find that next.
All right. Well, then we will go ahead and wrap it up. Glenn, thank you so much for being here. There's a couple notes from people saying thank you in the chat. I know that everyone did appreciate this and hopefully did find it helpful. If not, always send me a follow-up email, kim@krloveqcc.com. If you have further questions or you'd like to do an additional chat with Glenn, I'm sure that's something we could make happen. Thank you, Rick, for hosting this too for us and helping us set this up. That was very helpful.
Thank you very much for your time. Hey guys, it's Glenn. Thanks for your time today. I hope you liked today's episode. If you did, please consider smashing that like button. It's the single, simplest, fastest way to make sure that YouTube shows this video to more people. If you really want to go crazy, consider subscribing or going to our website and joining the mail list. If you want to go totally crazy beyond that, forward this to a friend or colleague who you think might enjoy this too. We're a small channel and every bit helps. Our next episode will be coming out next week, so in the meantime, feel free to look around the channel and see other videos that might be of interest. As a quick disclaimer, the views expressed on the show do not represent anything other than the people saying those words, views, etc. like that. It doesn't mean anything about their employers or their employers' views or some thing about their employers or their neighbor's cat or anyone else not saying the words. And in fact, given that people tend to change their views when they're thoughtful enough, it might not even represent the views of the speaker by the time you're hearing the episode. So definitely come back and see if they've changed their views at a later date. They also don't represent the views of our sponsors. Thank you to our sponsors. You can check them out on our website.